Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, March 21st, 2022, and on March 17th, Governor Chris Sununu from the state of New Hampshire pledged that he will veto the brand new congressional map. Now, on your screen right now, you're not seeing Governor Chris Sununu, you're actually seeing Governor Ron DeSantis for whatever reason, but the headline stands true. Governor Chris Sununu, a Republican who was elected back in 2016, saying that he will not pass a map that went through the Republican-controlled state legislature. Now, of many states that have a Republican trifecta, one of the last states you would expect is the state of New Hampshire, especially considering that the state of New Hampshire in the 2020 presidential election was won by President Joe Biden by 7.3%. In addition to that, there was a coinciding Senate election in the state of New Hampshire, and Democrats were able to win in this Senate election by a pretty significant amount. Senator Jeanne Shaheen was able to win by 15.6% across the state. And if it couldn't get better for the Democratic Party when it came down to the House elections, the Democratic Party won both districts, a singular district by 5 points and the other by 10 points. And the thing about the state of New Hampshire is that despite this being a Democratic state, despite this being a state where Democrats recently won a lot of the statewide elected offices, they also lost the governorship. And the governorship, they didn't exactly lose by a small amount either. The state of New Hampshire re-elected Governor Chris Sununu by over 40 percentage points across the state, 30 percentage points across the state, 65.2 to 33.4. And I mean, this is a state, again, might I remind you, that was voting for Democrats in all of their House elections, in their Senate election, and on the presidential level by a pretty significant amount. And to see Governor Chris Sununu win by such an excessive margin means that he was exceptionally popular. And with this popular type of wave, what you found was that liberal Republicans like Chris Sununu, who are able to win by such an amount, what you found was that in the New Hampshire House of Representatives elections, Republicans actually picked up 47 seats. Democrats lost control that evening. Back in 2018, the Democratic Party had a pretty significant showing because they actually went up in the majority. They picked up 61 seats, and they thought, being at 234 when you only need 201 was good enough to stay. But in 2020, what we found was that New Hampshire flipped up on them. They said, even though we're voting for Biden, even though we're voting for Democrats, we are voting for Republicans when it comes down to these individual local level races. And they elected Republicans to the House of Representatives in addition to electing them in the New Hampshire Senate. Republicans lost control in 2018, won back control in 2018, and thus Republicans then had a trifecta in the state of New Hampshire. So why am I telling you this? Well, in the old House map in the state of New Hampshire, what you will find is that Democrats pretty consistently were able to win in the state. In 2014, there was one Democrat, one Republican, but when you take a look at the map over time, generally speaking, in red waves, Republicans are able to win, but in blue waves, Democrats are able to hold on. And this map actually hasn't changed much over the past 40 years. What you will find is that the map did pretty much go back and forth for a very significant period of time. In 2012, Democrats won both seats, not by a lot, but by a smaller amount. In 2014, you saw a split delegation. 50% of the state was represented by Republicans. The other 50% was represented by Democrats. 2016 came around. It was closer again, but Democrats still were able to win, coinciding with Hillary Clinton's victory, and Democrats were able to win in 2018, again in 2020. But the interesting thing about this is that the map itself pretty much keeps all of these races competitive. If we were to go to 2006, you would find that this map was still competitive despite it being a blue wave year. In 2004, despite it being a year that was still competitive, Republicans actually had very solid results. In 2002, very solid results as well. Under the old congressional maps, you found that the maps themselves were turned into a competitive position because it split New Hampshire right down the middle. And this was the precedent that had been set for 40 years. I mean, you were talking about a map that simply hadn't changed boundaries. Many people were in the same congressional district for very significant periods of time. And while this does seem like it is a quote-unquote Democratic gerrymander, it does favor the Democratic Party. But in terms of, being relative to the national average, the first district actually was a Republican +1 district, and the second one was only Democrat +2. So generally speaking, it matches the national average as it did in 2020, 2016, and 2012. And I think that's what Governor Chris Sununu really wants to see maintained. Instead, the Republican Party put forth this map in the House of Representatives that passed through a party line vote, meaning that only Republicans were the ones supporting it. It then passed in the New Hampshire Senate by a 13-11 vote, meaning one Republican voted against it, I believe, but still a victory for the GOP because it passed. Until Governor Chris Sununu says, hold on, I'm going to go ahead and veto this. And he vetoed this in large part because this was a gerrymander. You see, the old map made it near impossible for there to be a gerrymander. It was a map that was going to be receptive to national averages, meaning that even in a bad year for the Democratic Party, there would be 2 Republican seats. In a good year for the Democratic Party, there would be 2 Democratic seats, and vice versa for the GOP. What the New Hampshire GOP map did instead was turned it into a map in which routinely there would be 1 Democrat and 1 Republican. And you think about this, you're saying, okay, doesn't that make sense for a state such as New Hampshire? Technically speaking, I would argue yes. But on the other hand, I would also say that a state such as New Hampshire should probably maintain a more competitive map rather than removing competitiveness entirely. You see, the state GOP map was also vetoed not because it overestimated Republican support, but also because of the fact it removed competitiveness from these races, turning New Hampshire's 2nd district into a D+10 district, meaning that it's going to be 10 points to the left of the nation, and the 1st district into a 9 points right of the nation map means that it's going to be very difficult for either opposing side to win. And while that might mean that about a state that is typically a swing state will have routine representation 50-50, that isn't always the fairest option. There are circumstances where Democrats are winning in the New Hampshire House elections by a significant amount. When you take a look at 2018, the Democratic Party won overall by over 10 points across the state. If you take a look at 2008, a year in which there was a wave for the Democratic Party in the House elections here, the Democratic Party won again by over 10 percentage points. When you take a look at other elections, you will find that Democrats do routinely defeat the Republican Party. But the older map also provides Republicans an opportunity for 2 pickups. The new one only provides them an opportunity for 1. Again, it solidifies 1, but there also could be that idea that Sununu is playing the electability card. In the future, Republicans might want these 2 seats because they've had them in the past and have been able to win in red waves as 2022 is expected to be, meaning that there would actually be more representation for the GOP than previously thought. Essentially speaking, I think what Governor Sununu wants to maintain is this idea that New Hampshire will be unilaterally represented by a singular political party depending on the wave year. Is it fair? Maybe not necessarily, but it is what Governor Sununu wants to see, and what Republican and Democratic governors have maintained for the past 40 years when it came down drawing new boundaries in the state of New Hampshire. I mean, this was a very clear gerrymander. You're talking about capturing in a city, cracking the other. The point was made to keep Democrats in one district and Republicans in the other. Whereas the old map from, again, decades now has been maintaining a least change notion that they simply will not change the congressional map heavily unless there are significant changes in the population. And yet this, New Hampshire has maintained 4 electoral votes for the past 40 years. So you are looking at a state that has maintained the same number of districts, same number of electoral votes, and thus has remained in the same districts. The populations don't deviate much, and that's exactly why Sununu seems to be against this. His exact thing that he stated was that the proposed congressional redistricting map is not in the best interest of New Hampshire, and I will veto it as soon as it reaches my desk. The citizens of this state are counting on us to do better. This also could be tied into the fact that Sununu is not a staunch Republican in the sense that he would agree with any type of gerrymander. When you see governors like Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott, they are eager to strip voters of fair representation. Not because, I'm actually not going to make this argument for them because I don't agree with these stances at all. I think it's entirely wrong to gerrymander, to, be very happy about the way that some of these maps are drawn, at least when you look at it from a nonpartisan standpoint. There are Democrats and Republicans who obviously are rooting for their team to win. They see it as a combated effort, going back against the Democrats, going back against the Republicans, whatever you might argue. But from a nonpartisan standpoint, you see this and you say, it's just wrong to want to gerrymander. If you're provided a map where you have no say, like in North Carolina, where Governor Roy Cooper, who I'm sure was vehemently against the Republican map here, he had no veto possibility, right? So it's not under his control. It's not his fault. But when you see governors out there eagerly pushing, even proposing their own maps, like you see in Florida with Ron DeSantis, where they want a gerrymander in a state that is typically swing left and right? What you're finding is that those are things that just simply should not be happening. But when you see Sununu sort of say, I think we should represent the interests of New Hampshire citizens, it sort of comes as a breath of fresh air, right? In the sense that you typically don't see governors going down that avenue. Democrats, of course, in Illinois, push forth gerrymanders. I'm not trying to single-handedly criticize the Republican Party. It's just in terms of those who have been most eager to put forth their own gerrymanders, you really only see that with Governor Ron DeSantis and potentially some other Republican and Democratic governors. But he was just a particular case that I thought was extremely fitting to the example that I was trying to put forth. So the state of New Hampshire, new map, what we are finding is that it actually might be very similar to what the Democrats had put forth. Republicans and Democrats equally get a chance to put forth their own congressional maps, and they did. Democrats put forth their own one, and Republicans put forth their own one as well. You might be thinking, okay, if the Republican legislature chose their own map, it might be because the Democrats decided for a gerrymander. They might have intentionally drawn the map to be unfair towards the Republican Party. But here's the new map from the Democratic Party. Here's the old map and here's the new map. Notice any changes? I mean, what you're finding is that even, down to the minuscule margins, you are seeing narrow changes, if at all. Take a look at Manchester down here. You'll see and notice a change that happens between the proposed map and the old map. It's very slight, very subtle, because that's the point of a least changed proposal. And I think that this goes into the idea that, the Democratic Party did not change the partisan compositions of these districts. They did not try to gerrymander the state of New Hampshire the way that Republicans did. And I think that's where the major concern comes in here for Governor Chris Sununu. At the end of the day, he is a Republican. And I think if it came down to it where he had to choose, he would prefer potentially the Republican map. But I think that he sees there an opportunity for a new map to fairly represent the interest of New Hampshire citizens. And I honestly don't know if that I could say that in full confidence. I do think that he does believe in not gerrymandering in any sort. And I think that's the honestly speaking, the best position that a governor should take. But Republicans are angry at him. What you are finding is that Republicans across the country, national and statewide, are calling him spineless. They're saying that he's a rhino, that he was never within the interest of the Republican Party. And it is infuriating for the GOP because they have been handed so many setbacks when it came down to the brand new congressional maps that are being drawn, and New Hampshire being one of the last states where the GOP really could have gained a singular congressional district, because they really aren't gaining any. If you take a look at the difference here, they're actually losing 6 relative to the old map. What you are finding is that New Hampshire Republicans, and I'm sure many national Republicans, are upset with this decision because they see it as an inaction on Chris Sununu's part. And it also, and I do see the argument that it is a fair map to provide voters with 50 to 50% routinely, right? I think that makes sense in a perfect world. But I think what Chris Sununu wants to do is to not split up cities, to not draw the congressional maps, to effectively cut out different regions of the state when heavy changes to this haven't been done in 40 years. You are finding that it's an interest of the voters less so than it is an interest of political parties. And being one of the remaining states where you see the Republican Party given an opportunity, one of the last few states, that we need to see finalized. And it just so happens that all of these states that have yet to be finalized, Missouri, New Hampshire, and Florida, have Republican trifectas, Louisiana being the only one where Democrats have veto power, which they actually just utilized. And that's a video for another day. You are looking at New Hampshire, which again was going to be a shining beacon, or at least a last effort for the GOP to combat the Democratic Party in terms of overall change. And not to say the Democrats are the only ones who gerrymander, but it is to show that the Democratic Party has maintained an advantage as a result of it. This is where they were going to get it. They were going to get it in Missouri, they were going to get it in Florida, and they were going to get it in New Hampshire, and Louisiana. And now what you're finding is Louisiana might actually have to add an additional Democratic district. What you're finding is that Missouri now has a status quo maintained. Instead of cutting out another district for the Democratic Party, there was a map put forth that would give Democrats 1-7. The new map is 6-2. The old map was 6-2. Not much changing in Missouri. In the state of Florida, Ron DeSantis is being opposed by his own state legislature. In a similar fashion to New Hampshire, except the roles are reversed, the state legislature does not want to gerrymander to extremes. Ron DeSantis does, right? But that conflicting means that they're going to pass a map that's not a gerrymander. They are going to get a veto from Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis put forth a map that was a gerrymander. They voted it down. And now it's going to go to the courts, and we will see what happens there. And chances are they will maintain the status quo as well. I think this is just more so a contribution to the Republican Party's onslaught of losses when it came down to the brand new process. And Chris Sununu, going through with his morals, going through with his values, just simply doesn't benefit them. While it is something that I respect heavily, I think this is the right decision for any governor across the nation to not pursue a gerrymander. It is unfortunate that there is backlash against him, but I can't say that it is unexpected. I think it is very much expected across the nation. And that's just the circumstance that we live in, where we are in a position where our politicians actively want to shift away from voters being represented fairly across the nation. But again, that is just a topic for another video because we are not going to get super in-depth into that. So, main takeaway here, Governor Chris Sununu, a Republican, decides to vote against the Republican new map here, meaning that we are likely going to end up with a status quo maintained, meaning that Democrats still maintain the opportunity to win 2 seats from the state of New Hampshire versus the old map that was passed by Republicans that would only give them the opportunity to win 1. This also means the Republican Party now has the opportunity to win 2 seats instead of the old map, which was 1. We will find that in 2022, I think the Republican Party will win both. In 2024, I think Democrats will win them back. We will see what happens. It's entirely possible because some incumbents are more popular than others that we do see. A district go blue and a district go red, and maybe we could be right back to where we were under the old GOP map. I think it's more unlikely, but I think it's very possible. Overall, I think this is where we stand when it comes down to New Hampshire's map and what it means for the rest of the nation. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 House election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.